My guest today is Lynda Harlos of Parent with Purpose. Lynda says, when you discover that more than 8 years after the fact, your daughter was trafficked, and she didn't tell you because she had no idea what happened to her, you have to ask yourself, what did I miss? Lynda talks with us about some of the problems that we as a society face when we try to deal with the issues of trafficking and abuse, and in particular, the difficulties that financial services people face in a disconnect between understanding the business of trafficking and finding out that the people who are trafficked are obviously victims. There's a link to Lynda's LinkedIn profile below. Lynda Harlos, welcome to Uncommon Sense. Why don't you tell us a little about you and why you're engaged in this work?
Well, actually, I think you kind of articulated that extremely well, Nigel. So my daughter is a very tenacious human being, always has been. She's the teenager that we would typically say is rebellious, but rebellion is something I think we misqualify. And it wasn't rebellion. It was her just trying to figure out who she was in the midst of religious rules, cultural rules, society rules, community rules. And she's just trying to figure out who she was. And so she broke a lot of the rules that we had in our home, not out of rebellion, but just trying to figure out who she was. And in that breaking of some of the rules, she ended up going to a party that we didn't know anything about. She ended up getting gang raped. She ended up becoming pregnant. And because of all of that, she thought it was her fault because she'd broken the rules. And then what happened is she became ostracized in the social society that she belonged to. So a lot of her friends, some people from our religious community, just struggled with believing whether or not her story was true and started making her feel very isolated, not believing that her story of being raped was really her being raped, that she was just trying to cover up the fact that maybe she had been promiscuous at some point. So she ended up struggling with that, as well as trying to struggle with what she was going to do with being a single mom, had no idea who the dad was. So she struggled with the whole social aspect of what she did wrong or what she thought she did wrong, and the legalities behind that, the rights and wrongs, the moral code. But then she also struggled with what society is now expected of her as a single parent. She didn't want to be a single parent. Her dream was to always have a loving, caring family like her dad and I have. And then along came a guy who saw a lot of her struggles, a lot of what it was she was looking for now that she was in a very vulnerable situation, and decided he was going to step in and become her hero. And I say that quotes unquote. And at first we thought it was just abuse. And honestly, we didn't know anything about abuse or trafficking because we don't come from an abusive family, knew nothing about trafficking except from the movie Taken, which is obviously a very unrealistic point of view of domestic sex trafficking. But so she ended up getting caught up in this dream of having a perfect life and somebody who was going to step in, who wasn't the father figure. And he was going to help her take care of her problems that were created by her tenacity to just be a human being and wanted to, stretch her wings and find out who she was.
And that's one of the big issues we have here, isn't it? Is that the disconnect between the people who should be able to identify this,
yes,
be it shopkeepers or travel agents or the people who are on the desk at help centers, they don't see the entire picture.
Mm-hmm.
Or when they see the picture, they see the part of the picture that relates to the victim and the horrors that the victim goes through. But in the financial sector, we don't see the victim. What we see is television representations of the victim. We see articles about victims, and we see films about victims. For example, the Chinese film that is causing a storm pretty much everywhere at the moment, called No More Bets. We see that there are many people from all kinds of backgrounds, including caring, loving, sensible families like yours, who find themselves through a conflux of circumstances in a position where they become vulnerable and are then abused in many ways. And in your case, you told me off air that during this extended period with her abuser, your daughter wasn't even able to buy nappies for the child and so on, because all the money was kept in a safe. And she found out that that there was money, that she was earning money that she didn't have access to. Now, this obviously the transactions in her case were mostly done in cash, which of course is very difficult for financial sector to identify unless somebody takes the cash to the bank. But where the economy is in cash, for example, through motorcycle gangs or drug gangs operating on the street, it often doesn't hit the banks until it becomes a problem to store. So one of the things that I'd like to discuss with you is that while the media and much of the discussion centers on the horror stories, when it comes to engaging the financial sector, those stories become a distraction because their work is data-driven, not driven by emotions. And is there a way that we can bridge that gap when the data comes from the very people that are the reason that the emotions run high?
Oh, that's a loaded question, and honestly not one that I think I can honestly identify or answer properly in a way that is coherent to the financial world. And let me just backtrack a bit, because with my daughter, none of the transactions that happened were cash. She was never handed cash. She was never handed cash and then her give it to her trafficker and then him put it in the safe. There was a third-party person involved here who took care of all of the money transactions. She never saw a cent of it. And when and if she was handed cash or money of any sort, it was from her trafficker. And I don't know where he got it from. I'm assuming the third-party person handed her cash for diapers or for food or whatever. And it was never enough. Never enough, so much that she still came to us asking us for money. And of course, we just thought he wasn't working. He was being, excuse my French, an idiot, not working enough, not taking care of things. So I'm not sure I can answer that question articulately in the realm that we're talking about financial, because on this end of it, there is no cash that's showing.
Well, I think you've just answered it, because
okay.
what you've just demonstrated is that what is apparently what you didn't mention during your explanation of what you do is that she was in fact sold for sex.
Absolutely, she was definitely sold for sex, and it was done by a third-party person.
Okay, so you have termed that elsewhere prostitution, whereas the current view of this is that as a victim, she's not a prostitute; she's a victim.
Yes.
And one of the issues that we have in this whole area is that of terminology.
But realistically, we know that there's usually a profit of some sort, right?
There's a benefit of some sort.
Benefit, okay, a benefit. That's a better word. You're right. Absolutely. Okay.
This is again where we come down to our central problem.
Yes, language.
We don't always see the money.
Yep, you're right.
From a financial services point of view, we don't see benefits. We only see money.
Right.
So
no, you're absolutely right.
The benefit is that over a period of time, the madam builds up enough of a credit for the trafficker that she buys him a car. We don't see that transaction, but we might see the car.
Or we might see a political rise or an affiliation where somebody is now given more status. I get it. I get what you're saying. And that's the part that really sucks, because there's nothing that's tangible in that per se that you can point to. And yeah, I can see why the financial sector has a problem with this.
From the financial services point of view, horrible as that was not visible. And what we need to do is to find ways of making the financial transactions or the benefits visible to the people who have an obligation to report suspicion of those transactions. And in the case of Epstein, which you mentioned, the banks knew that there were benefits being provided to people who then became customers of the bank or in some way helped Epstein to attract more business. And that's where the money laundering aspects came about, and that's where action was able to be taken. But Epstein himself was primarily, it was about the sexual abuse, not about the money in the case against
Yes.
Epstein.
Yes, I
And
know.
that's the money aspects were circumstantial to that case. Look, this man's got all this money. He behaved like this. He must have been acting badly.
Hmm.
There was no
Hmm.
strong connection between the
Proof.
money and the conduct. And what we as an industry need to find is ways of creating
How
that
to do
connection.
that. I get it.
And as we've seen with everything we've said, that is really hard to do.
I'm not sure you're going to ever be able to, because that's the genius behind a criminal, honestly,
Well,
and that's why they get away with it.
it's a
It's
genius
because they
behind
know that.
that particular type of criminal, which is not, I mean, lots of criminals are very highly visible.
No, but
when
yeah,
when crime is effectively a crime of subterfuge, a crime which is very much in the shadows in every possible way, then the money that comes from that, which also is hidden in the shadows, doesn't become visible until it becomes visible. What we're looking for here is that there is an awful lot of information pushed at people in financial services about people trafficking generally. But it's done on a basis that doesn't relate to their work. And we see what are effectively political statements from regulators and supranational bodies and governments, because they're playing to the audience, which is the victims and those that support the victims.
right.
They're not playing to the audience of the people who are in a position to potentially do something about it. Now, I will tell you.
Are we talking about the people who purchase?
No, they're not. Well, we're talking about the relationship between the financial sector and the people that purchase, and also
Okay.
the people that sell, and also the people that move people about.
Okay.
So those people don't see, they see the money, but they don't know what it's doing, and they don't understand why. I mean, they know why it's important. It's not they don't understand the problem. They understand that there are horrors of all kinds, including one that I posted yesterday, from a court case in the UK. And when I started writing about this in 1996, it was about the horrific abuse of children in the Philippines and India, and why this was a financial crime. That is a message which even today is difficult to get across, because people cannot, they understand it in abstract.
Yes.
And they can see actual victims talking on television or writing
Yes.
books or doing all things. But the difficulty is that all plays to their emotions.
Yes.
And what we need to do is to get them to treat it in the same way as they treat drug trafficking. They don't worry about the victims when they're talking about the financial crime aspect. Socially, morally, emotionally, yes, they're all concerned about the victims. But when it comes to understanding how to deal with the money that's involved in the drugs trade, the victims don't matter. Well, not as people. They are purely a point of intelligence. And so it's very important that we get away from the horrors that people face, and we focus on what can be identified. Like, can you identify people who are traveling overseas for sex tours? Can you identify people that are being imported into a country for sex tours? These are the kinds of issues that we need to get people to concentrate on. Now, airlines do it. Your son-in-law will have had training on how to identify sex traffickers on planes, and his ground crew will have had training on how to identify people when they check in. Immigration officers get it, so they can identify people when they're coming in normally to a country. But bankers don't get that type of understanding. They don't see the guy walking into the bank with the victim on his arm unless the victim is being helped to open a bank account which can be used for transmitting or even storing the proceeds of the very crime that's being committed. So this is where we have a disconnect between the approach, which is very much centered on the victim, and the approach which financial services people have to have, which concentrates on account holders, on the money movements. And so to treat it as any other financial crime, that's really the message, is forget that it's about people, when just consider, are there other instances where we can show that there is a financial crime?
Okay, so
I know that's not exactly what you do, but
no, it's not. But that's beside the point, Nigel, and that's the reason why I was.
Exactly the point. It's exactly the point, because you have an understanding of the aspects of how the people move the money, what the people do. You do, because you see, you may not know you do, but you do, because you've seen the people that run these things.
Right.
You've seen the victims and how the money is, the money moves between the buyers of services and the victims and all the providers of the service.
And I guess, and maybe that's why I think this is why there's that disconnect, because all I know is that my daughter ended up getting nothing, and the money that her trafficker got was put in a safe that she did not have the combination for.
And that's the problem we have. Lynda Harlos, thank you very much for your time. It's been absolutely fascinating, and I'm quite sure for you, quite harrowing. I know that you rehash this every minute of every day. Your daughter's okay now, I take it?
My daughter is great now.
So it is perfectly possible for someone to come out the other side. Lynda, thank you very much indeed. Thank you,
Nigel. I appreciate just talking to you and learning. I've learned a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nigel. Bye.